Hello again, back with a third Cyberpunk style building. This time, did a bunch of concept sketches and doodles to try and figure out what I wanted to make. I decided a kind of mini warehouse type thing would be a useful addition. So I got some foam core and blocked out the building. Then to cover the foam core, took some of the underfloor insulation board with a nice concrete style texture, and using hot glue, I covered about half the walls with these panels, so it looks like a modular, very kind of quick, hasty construction fix they've done. I also beveled some of the edges and cut some 45-degree panels to add a bit more visual interest to the piece. As we all know, 45-degree angles make it look sci-fi. Then using a few bits of styrofoam to cover up the edges and give a kind of brick facade on the outside. Grabbing some slightly old polyfiller and giving it a decent mix, I then filled in the larger gaps between the concrete panels. Using my fingernails, I plucked out a few sections so we'd add some wear and tear onto the stone pieces, as well as the concrete ones. Taking some strips of plasticard, I then assembled a few frames so I could later mount some neon lettering on, as well as add some obscuring cover on top of the building. I envision it having a bunch of kind of old, derelict kind of metallic structures on the roof, which will also cover up the edges a bit more. To make some girders to support the overhang, I cut some squares of plasticard, then glued some square plastic rods into the centre, using some small bedazzle beads to create some large metal rivets in the base. To secure these, I used some matte Mod Podge and made sure they were reasonably well spaced. To create the frameworks on top of the building, I took more of the square plastic tube and then applied some of the girders on top. To add some more interest to the walls, I took some more bedazzle beads, this time square ones, and pressed them on the outside of the walls, so they could be little exterior electronic modules or something. Grabbing some EVA foam and some Mod Podge, I trimmed some pieces down to size, and covered up the edges of the foam core, where it was still visible in between. Mostly around the edges of the door frames, as well as overlapping on the base, before giving the entire thing a coat of black gesso. Once this had time to dry, I mixed together some white and black paint to make a nice light grey, then gave the entire thing a coat of that as well. To follow this up, took some spare packaging foam, tore a piece of it out, and started dabbing a tan colour over the top. Now we don't want to be too heavy with this, we just want a nice texture, but we also want to change the main colour to a kind of beigey grey. Taking a pure white paint, I then stippled it onto the areas where the foam core was still visible, so it would have a nice plaster texture. Then also use this to dry brush over the edges of the concrete to blend it together and make the edge details kind of pop. Taking some sheets of black EVA foam, I then pre-painted them using a red colour. And I normally go for a nice seafoam green, but I wanted to mix it up a bit and add a bit of red to the scheme. Then while that dried, I applied a metallic coat of silver onto the girders and the exposed bits of metal. Using watered down brown paint, I applied some rust and kind of bronzing onto the pipes, as well as adding a bit of kind of dirt and grime build up in the corners. And by watering it down, it dries very pale, and you get some nice weathering. Very similar to how they blend textures together in a video game. I then hit the EVA foam that I'd already attached with a red paint. It was at this point I realised I'd forgot to add any windows whatsoever. So taking a mesh as a template, I then cut them out of the foam core, which is a great advantage of these materials, is you can just cut into them when you're done, and redesign stuff on the fly. So I added 2 windows, one on the front, one on the side. Then using more EVA foam, I filled in the window frames, and used the mesh in the middle. For the garage door, I took some corrugated cardboard with a metallic finish, which is normally a bit sturdier, and takes paint a little bit better, then trimmed it down to size with a pair of scissors. I'm just using a friction fit, so it can be easily removed and put in if I want it to be. Adding a bit of graffiti to the walls with some felt tip pens. And my preferred method of this is still to block in an area of colour, and then figure out what the text is over the top. So just adding random lines until something appears. Jumping back to the garage door, I gave that a coat of black gesso, and when dried, I gave it a coat of red paint as well. Then to add some weathering, took a sponge again and some metallic paint, then dabbed over the front so the raised areas would get chipping. While I had the metallics out, I gave a coat to the frameworks on top, using a sponge just so it has a bit more texture to it. Then using matte Mod Podge to attach the frameworks to the roof and the front of the building where I want the neon sign to be. To create the neon sign, I took some garden wire, bent it into shape using round nose pliers, then applied a coat of nail polish. Using nail polish is definitely a skill I need to get a bit more experience with, as I end up replacing it later. Taking more of the slightly watered down brown paint, I pulled some rust in the corners of the metal frameworks. Then taking a larger brush, and using the neon signs as a template, I applied some backlighting by dry brushing a similar colour onto the frame. Then once I'd applied the backlighting, using more matte Mod Podge, I glued the sign in place. I wanted to add some notes and a few kind of posters onto the side of the wall, so to get some textured paper, I took the inside of an envelope I'd been sent and applied lettering using a fine tipped pen, before cutting it into small squares, and using tweezers and matte Mod Podge to apply it over the graffiti. If you get excess glue along the edges, then you can easily cover it up with another poster. Or if you wanted to print some out, then you could probably make some much nicer posters. Grabbing more EVA foam, I covered up some more edges of the concrete sections. Then I decided I really hated the sign, so I went in with some more garden wire, and without using the nail polish, gave it a coat of white paint. Then while that was drying, I took the opportunity to clean up some of the edges, and fill in the sides of the EVA foam. With the white undercoat dry, I went in with a neon blue and a neon pink, and gave a coat to the hobby wire. So it's a lot thinner, and a lot less gloopy and blobby looking than the nail polish, which I need a bit more experience using. For a final touch, I went in with more of the watered down brown paint, and added a few more spots of weathering, to deepen the shadows, and make it all a bit more grimy, and lived in. So not focusing too much on the interior this time, which I might do as a separate video later on, but at the moment just keeping it nice and playable and clear. But that is another building for the Cyberpunk style city. So a bit more of a utility building, but it matches the other two, and looks quite nice alongside them. So looking forward to maybe getting some games in, but still a fair amount of buildings to go before I can fill my 3 foot by 3 foot board entirely. But anyway, thanks so much for watching, I hope to catch you next time, and I hope you enjoyed the video.